So for a fact, we know that Madam Web was meant to be an MCU film. This is something that was confirmed as far back as the early development of the film goes. And then in the end, it's not an MCU film, but we know that there was tons of connections. So in this video, we're going to go over all the latest evidence and 100% proof, and then look at what exactly happened to bring us from this is an MCU film to this isn't even a Sony Universe film. So if you look at comments that have been made over the past couple of years and the relationship that Sony and Marvel Studios and Disney have had, you can obviously see that there are quite a few red flags and problems that pop up all over the place. So let's just be real about this. From statements made from CEOs to the very public relationship and rivalry that hit all of mainstream media. I mean, it was a giant mess. But when you take a step back, when you really look at everything, you do start to see a pattern here of the two trying to work things out, trying to work together, trying to really make the best universe possible and one specific universe where everything exists. Now, of course, in hindsight, we know that this did not work out. We know that things didn't play out and that the two ultimately went their own separate ways. But now, with new evidence to support that everything was supposed to be connected at once and that Madam Web was in fact going to be an MCU film, we really got to look at the biggest picture. And with new evidence provided, that's exactly what we're going to do. So let's talk about Marvel and Sony working together and those early days. So first and foremost, we got to get into the complexity of the whole Madam Web situation. And this is as far back as I can remember, going all the way back to when Olivia Wilde was supposed to direct a film for Sony that was also set in the MCU. She was the one that ended up posting on Twitter, tagging Marvel Studios, tagging Sony, and of course, tagging Kevin Feige, saying that there's a great opportunity and they're excited to announce an upcoming project. Nothing happened, and then we never heard from her again. Now, as far as we know, she was on hand to direct a Madam Web film, or specifically a Spider-Woman film, but things changed. Now, this is where things get really interesting because this takes us to the earliest point in the timeline, and this is well over 6 years ago. So there's a timeline here that shows us that things were in development right alongside when they were ready to put out Spider-Man Far From Home, and all the problems happened. Which brings us to Marvel Studios and Sony working together. So the idea was to try to put everything together to try to save Sony's output. Sony naturally wanted a lot of money and they wanted to be guaranteed this piece of the MCU puzzle, right? Hence why they kept talking about adjacent films. Hence why, as far back as Venom 1, they tried to work Spider-Man in. But cooler heads always prevailed in the end, and they didn't end up just shoehorning stuff in there. So when we get to Madam Web, the MCU, and everything going on, we know for a fact that things were meant to connect. First example is this concept art. So this was concept art showing us Peter Parker Spider-Man, the MCU Spider-Man, as you will be able to tell by the suit he's wearing and what's going on, as he's fighting Ezekiel. And you can see here that things were definitely going to be strange. And what happened here was that a portal opened up that pulls Spider-Man and Ezekiel into this universe, as either of them were not from this universe. And then another piece that we just recently got was popcorn buckets and drinks that got far along in development, that they did in fact feature MCU mentions, from Groot to Drax to mentioning events of the MCU, from the Daily Bugle reporting it and talking about a brand new hero that's been spotted, aka Madam Web, and of course the other Spider-Women. You then compound that with the fact that we saw a all-new suit / character design for Tom Holland's Spider-Man in the art book for Madam Web, which shows us a take on the MCU suit that's a little bit more of an evolution, that's pulling in elements that we can see is drawing some parallels to the suit he ending up in the MCU in No Way Home. But we know, due to concept art in that book and what we've seen and Spider-Man Far From Home, that they were trying to bridge things and that the suit was evolving, going back and forth between other projects, in this case, Madam Web. Which then brings us to the ultimate question: what went wrong? So while we don't know what went wrong with 100% certainty, there's plenty of speculation out there and there is some evidence. First and foremost, the first thing that went wrong was, as this whole thing was in development, there was the Spider-Man deal that fell apart. This, of course, was the continuation and the continued use of Spider-Man in the MCU after Spider-Man Far From Home. We, of course, know they worked things out and that Venom had a Spider-Man film in development where Spider-Man and Venom were going to face off. We, of course, know that this was scrapped. But recently, Tom Hardy did reveal, and I covered it, and I'll make sure I link up one of them, that this project got further along than most people realize. Now, if you lay out the timetable, you can see that when that conversation was going on, that Madam Web was already in production. And we for a fact know that Tom Holland's Spider-Man was meant to be featured, but also we know this story. And the story was that the Spider-Woman in this film, including Madam Web, were trying to prevent the death of Peter Parker while his mom was pregnant with him. We all know this for a fact because this was all detailed. We can even see elements of this in the concept art and the additional pieces of content that they revealed. We know that the story had to get reshuffled when Peter was removed, and the end result was a sloppy film. But when you really think about what was going on and how Marvel Studios was trying to play ball with Sony and vice versa, you can see that there was a problem. And the problem was that Sony wanted to do their own thing. They were playing in the MCU playground, but they didn't want to play under the rules that Marvel Studios had. So when a new deal was worked out to be able to pull everything back, Madam Web was still allowed to be technically an MCU film. But then Sony realized that this film isn't going to succeed. They got as far as producing merchandise based on the film, like the popcorn bucket. Now, this would place this around 6 months before the film came out. But remember, Madam Web was also delayed. So now you go right back to the exact time period where the relationship between the two fixed itself, and they announced more Spider-Man and the multiverse film. Therefore, we can see that at one point everything was connected up until everybody realized this is a bad idea, and that entire element was pulled. Thank you for checking out that video, and thank you for your continued support. Feel free to like, share, subscribe, do whatever you will, and if you're so inclined and would like some additional content from us, which includes unfiltered content and bonus discussions, we do offer exclusively in our member section. We hope to see you there. So thank you for watching, and have a good one.